Hello, young scholars. This is Mr. Martyron with your Flip Classroom. This is part 4 of the French Revolution. This is when Napoleon Bonaparte comes to power. Napoleon Bonaparte, we're going to take a look. Was he a hero or was he the villain of the French Revolution? Napoleon Bonaparte, a very interesting character. Very interesting indeed. We're going to take a look at his rise to power in this video and how he really rescues France and Europe from kind of the brink of destruction. One of the very interesting things about Napoleon, and I'm sure you will all be teasing me about this quite shortly, is if you don't know anything about Napoleon already, you know that he is short. He actually was not that short. He was Mr. Martyron's height, which is 5'6". Psychologists have named a complex after him because Napoleon was always out to dominate or conquer things. They say it was because he was overcompensating for his height. If you look at illustrious men in history, men like Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Washington, Lincoln, various others, they're usually tall, strapping men. Napoleon was not. He was not the central figure in the room. He was short even by today's standards, 5'6". So lots of times people will say you have a Napoleon complex if you are a short person with a very strong and dominating personality. So after watching this video, I will let many of you have at it when you come to class. You can tease me on it all you want. Yes, they do say I have a Napoleon complex. So a little bit of background on our friend Napoleon. He was born on the French island of Corsica in the Mediterranean Sea, and his family belonged to the Second Estate. They were minor nobles, and they had a little bit of money. And at the age of 9, Napoleon is sent to the French Military Institute, and he's going to have a career in the military. He's 20 years old, so he's about 6 or 7 years older than most of you guys when the French Revolution breaks out. And now you have to understand, think about it. Napoleon, 20 years old, he's a lieutenant in the French army. What does he do? Does he stay loyal to the crown, or does he join the revolutionaries who seem to be gaining the upper hand? Well, what does Napoleon do? What do you think? No peeking. What does he do? Well, he's very confused, but he very cautiously takes the side of those who would be victorious. So he's very selective about his political alliances during this time period. And again, one of the very unique things about Napoleon is he's able to stay out of trouble. So how does Napoleon rise to power? So he leads several victories against the Austrians, and he actually captures parts of northern Italy and the Alps. He's a gifted military general, perhaps one of the greatest military generals of his time. He is known for being outnumbered, sometimes 2-1, and still being able to divide his forces and beat and defeat his opponent. So that's always a plus. How he comes to power is he's a very victorious political leader. And if you remember from the last video, the directory after the death of Robespierre is very weak. So he comes to power and essentially he overthrows the directory. There's what's called a coup d'etat, which is a coup or an overthrow of the government. So he overthrows the directory. And he changes that and he sets up a 3-man, what's called a consulate, a governing board. And he appoints himself in 1802 as consul for life. Quite remarkable. So remember, and this is when we talk about Napoleon, was he a hero or villain of the French Revolution? What was the goal of the French Revolution? Well, the goal was to have a democracy. Remember John Locke, natural right? Well, Napoleon is taking power for himself, and that's not really what John Locke would have had in mind with the French Revolution. All right. Here are some paintings of young Napoleon. These are, when we study the art of the French Revolution, these are what would be considered romantic images of Napoleon, waving the flag. This is one of my favorite portraits of Napoleon. It's always neat when you see, one military leader looking at the success or conquest of the other. It's always great, for example, to see a picture of, President Obama looking at a picture of, or at the Lincoln Memorial, where other great men of history are following in their footsteps. Well, here is Napoleon in Alexandria, Egypt, looking at the Sphinx, and off in the distance you can see is his grand army marching through the desert. Napoleon was a very successful military general. When he did lose battles, however, he was very quick not to advertise those defeats. So he was selective about what news, made it back home. Napoleon Bonaparte also was very famous for his hand in his chest, in his breast pocket. This is going to be known as the Napoleonic pose. Um, it becomes very famous and very popular in Europe. It's kind of, if I made the analogy, and I'm sure this is going to be outdated in 2017, but perhaps the ducklet pictures when you guys take selfies, that is the style now, or selfies themselves are the style. Well, Napoleon with the hand in his pocket was the style of the day. This painting depicts Napoleon overthrowing the moment he overthrows the Directory, and you can see chaos ensuing in the government. So now, this very creepy, what some consider a creepy picture of Napoleon. Napoleon becoming an emperor. Again, I can't emphasize how this is contrary to the goals and ideals of the French Revolution. They wanted a democracy, and in exchange, they ended up with a emperor. So Napoleon beautifully invites the Pope to preside over his coronation at the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. During the ceremony, the Pope walks towards Napoleon with the crown. And again, remember, the Pope is God's guy on earth. So by taking the crown from the Pope, it is a rejection of the Catholic Church. So think about that. The Pope typically would put the crown on your head, and that's kind of God ordaining you. Again, going back to the idea of divine right. But Napoleon takes that crown from his head and puts it on his own. Napoleon, one of his first acts as emperor in an unusual turn of events, he holds what are called plebiscites. And the plebiscite is a ballot where voters can approve or disapprove of an issue. This is unique, again, because he's an emperor in name and he's an emperor in certain traits, but he is still giving people the power. And that's why one of the questions, it would make a great DBQ question, as I know you all just rolled your eyes at that one. It would make a great question as to whether you've got an emperor, is he a hero or villain of the French Revolution? All right. This is the famous painting. We're actually going to talk about this when we look at romantic art. Here is Napoleon at the center. He has taken the crown from the Pope. He is holding it up. There is his wife, Josephine, who is bowing to the new emperor. What is awesome about this painting is the scale of it. This painting was done by Jean-Louis David. He did the painting called The Death of Marat. He also did the painting of The Trial of Socrates, if you remember that from the beginning part of the year. Well, Napoleon, if you look very carefully, he's up on these 3 steps. So he is elevated above the people in front of him. And he is also, everyone behind him is seated. So again, Napoleon looks to be a little bit taller than he actually is. All right, just another technique that the artist used to make him the center point. Great story about Napoleon when he takes the crown. Before he and Josephine walk out, he says, Josephine, today you are my wife and I am your husband. But when I am crowned, remember that I am your emperor and you all will be subject to me. But the two of them had a very intense relationship. Right there, it's a little bit pixelated. I've got a higher resolution one that we'll go over in class. Napoleon taking the crown. All right, love this painting of Napoleon. Take a minute, think, who does he look like with those olive leaves on his head? Well, if you guessed Julius Caesar, you're correct. So, there's our friend Napoleon, rising to power, a little bit older now, still has his hand in his pocket. He's getting older, a little bit wiser, still the great military commander. But what did he actually do? What did Napoleon accomplish as emperor? Well, under his reign, he regulated the economy. He encouraged new industry. He builds roads and canals. He promotes system of public schools, and he won support across the different classes. So let's talk about this. Remember, from the French Revolution, prices were all out of control. The price of bread was so expensive, people couldn't even afford a loaf of bread. And that's really what was one of the causes of the French Revolution. Napoleon regulates those. He says to farmers and cattlemen, he says, you can't charge more, you know, you can't charge more than what we can pay. So he regulates industry there. He encourages new industry. He encourages the arts and the sciences. Building roads and canals, infrastructure. This is so important. This is an issue that President Trump said in his first 100 days. He wants to spend money building roads and bridges and canals. Napoleon is a military general. He knows that in order to get his army from point A to point B, you have to have a strong road system. You have to have a road system that's wide enough for your army to move from point A to point B very quickly. Napoleon knows this, so he invests lots of money into building roads and canals. He also encourages people to go get an education, go to school. So he promotes a public school system. And this makes him quite popular among his subjects. So Napoleon, again, although he's holding the reign of emperor and the title of emperor, he's still doing a lot of popular things that are what people advocated for during the French Revolution. All right. He institutes something called the Napoleonic Code. All right. The Napoleonic Code says all male citizens are equal before the law. He grants a religious toleration, and he now says advancement is going to be based on merit. So it's now a meritocracy. All right. This is important. A meritocracy is what we have today. So if you apply for your job, it's going to be the best person for the job. Not on who your father was, who your mother was, or what social class you were born into. If you're the best person qualified for the job, you're going to get that job. All male citizens are equal before the law. This is important because some of the women that gain rights during the French Revolution actually lose rights under Napoleon. And he does grant religious toleration, which we remember from the last class was taken away under Robespierre when they tried to dissolve the Catholic Church. And as I just said, the code undid some of those reforms for women. Ironically, here's a little extra credit question. The only state in the United States to live under the Napoleonic Code is Louisiana, and in fact, New Orleans, because, and here again, some more extra credit for you, one of Napoleon's first goals was that he had to balance the budget. He had to pay off that huge debt that France had. So, what does he do? He sells that immense tract of land known as Louisiana to the United States. So think about it like this. Had France not been in debt, we may not have gotten the Louisiana Territory. We may not have expanded our country, from the Mississippi to the Pacific. All right, so let's take a look at this little graphic. This shows Napoleon expanding his territory. This is all of Europe, or about half of Europe, under Napoleon and French control. He puts his brother, Joseph Napoleon, in charge of Spain, and he says they make good allies. He puts other friends in charge of Italy and other parts of Prussia. So he's always uniting power and maintaining his base there. All right, how he builds an empire, and this is number 6. Napoleon annexed some areas outright. He just took them. I'll go back. As you guys can see, he annexed parts of Poland, or what's now Poland. He just takes it. So he annexes parts of Poland. He abolishes the Holy Roman Empire. That is now officially gone. He cuts the territory of Prussia in half. He turns the Grand Poland Duchy of Warsaw. We'll talk a little bit more about that in class. And he, like I just said, he puts his friends and families in key positions on the throne. His brother Joseph becomes king of Spain. One problem Napoleon did have, and this is number 7. He got 99 problems, and England is all that matters. I know I totally messed that up. So England. Napoleon has a great continental system. He can move his army around Europe, but he doesn't have a strong navy. And that's why he can't invade um, England. So the Britons, what they do is, or the French, what they do is they put a blockade. They close European ports to British goods in the efforts of maybe harming or hurting the economy there. Britain responds with a blockade of their own, and they seize neutral ships that are suspected of trading with the enemy. This is one of the causes for America's entry into what war? Well, we're already done the American Independence War. It's too early for the Civil War. Did you guess the War of 1812? Well, if you did, you are correct. Um, Great Britain confiscates neutral ships, and they take the sailors and saying, "Well, you were born a British subject, and you're still a British subject." And America says, "Knock it off. If not, we're going to go to war." And in fact, we do go to war with Great Britain, and that begins the War of 1812. Now, Napoleon's downfall. I would love to talk to you more about Napoleon's downfall, but then that would mean you wouldn't have a reason to watch the dramatic conclusion of the French Revolution, which is video 5. So if I've gone too fast, or if you need to go back and catch another point again, please watch this video, or you can post your questions on Edmodo.